Our opening speaker is Dr. Elizabeth Canning. She's an assistant professor at Washington State University. And she received her PhD in social psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she specializes in the study of achievement, motivation, social inequality, and social psychological interventions in education and organization. This is my first chance to actually meet Elizabeth in person. We've had some really wonderful conversations, and one thing that stuck out to me just in our conversations last night, we were talking about, when you finally get your papers published, and then you look back and you think, oh, look at all those mistakes. It could have been so much better. Not Elizabeth. When we asked her, how do you feel about the papers? And she says, I look back and think, yeah, that was really good. No regrets. So, no regrets. Looking forward to your talk this morning.
No regret. Today I'm going to talk about 3 different groups. So I want to get us all on the same page. So some of the statistics I'm going to mention are US specific, but a lot of the problems I'm going to talk about are definitely Western-wide, but also worldwide issues. So in the United States and in many other countries, a college education is still one of the best forms of social mobility that we have today. This is one of the number one things that you can do to sort of get a leg up in society. Yet, there are huge disparities in higher education that make getting a college degree, getting in, and then also finishing that college degree much more difficult for certain groups. There's a lot of barriers in place that certain people have to deal with that others don't. So some of those groups that I'm going to talk about today, first are people who are historically excluded in higher ed due to race, ethnicity. These students tend to, on average, earn lower grades than their white counterparts. They tend to drop out at higher rates. Another group I'm going to talk about are first-generation college students. So these students are the first in their family to go to college. Neither parent has a 4-year college degree. Only about 40% of first-generation college students actually finish college. This is a huge problem, especially in the United States, where you have to pay for college. Because then what happens is that these students acquire debt over time, and then they don't get the degree at the end of the day that then can help pay off that debt, but then can also facilitate that social mobility. So it's a huge problem, particularly in the United States. So that 40% is compared to 70% of continuing generation students who end up getting that college degree. Another group I'm going to talk about is women in STEM fields. So women now outperform men in college. So they're getting better grades overall than men in college. It's actually kind of, some people are turning it into sort of like, well, what about the men? Now they're underperforming, right? But women, even though on average they're earning higher grades in college overall, they tend to underperform in certain fields like science, technology, engineering, and math. So where we would expect them to perform based on all their prior experience, they tend to underperform where they should, given all of that information compared to men. So these are huge disparities in higher education that we've been trying to figure out and understand for many years. This is not a new issue. But the question still remains as why are these gaps so persistent? And we know from lots of years of work that it's complex. There's not one issue at play. There are economic factors, there are structural, systemic factors. But I'm a social psychologist, so I'm going to look at these gaps from a social psychological perspective, which means that I'm interested in how the individual interacts with their environment to change the way that they feel, to change the way that they think about the content. So what that means is that these gaps can be exacerbated or widened and potentially narrowed, which we'll talk about later, based on social psychological factors. So that's the extent that these students feel less engaged in certain environments. They feel less interested in certain fields versus other environments. They might feel less motivated in certain environments compared to others. That also changes the way they think about things. So maybe they're worrying about things that other people don't have to worry about, like whether or not they're going to fit in or belong in that particular setting or context, or whether they're worried about confirming a negative stereotype about their group that other people don't have to worry about. So these social psychological factors, what I'm going to argue is this is a really ripe opportunity for instructors to make a meaningful difference. So the structural issues, the economic issues are, of course, things that we should still focus on changing. But sometimes that can feel really daunting for an instructor. Well, I can't change how things are done at my institution. I can't change how the world works, but I can change the context in my classroom, and I can change these social psychological factors to make sure that students don't have to worry about these extra things, at least in my context. So I believe, and I'm going to hope to convince you over this talk, that this is a great opportunity for people to step up and do some meaningful things to make a difference in their classrooms. So let me give you an example of how this might play out for students. So I want you to imagine that you are in your first year at university, okay? You're a student in an introductory science class, okay? You just get back your first exam score. So maybe this is the first time you have ever taken a college level exam, okay? You get the exam back and it's not the grade you were expecting. You were expecting to do better, and the grade, the number on that paper, or the number, I guess, digital now, when you log in, right? You log in and see your number, and that number's not what you were expecting, okay? So what happens then is people try to make meaning of that, okay? What does this number mean about me? One way to interpret that number is to think, this means there's something about my ability. Maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe it's not as good as I thought I was. Maybe I can't do this. Maybe this subject, biology in this case, isn't for me or people like me. Okay, that number holds a lot of meaning about yourself and what you are capable of. Okay, that would be one interpretation of that number. Another interpretation might be, well, the reason why this number exists, the reason why I didn't get what I wanted to get, is because I didn't do something the way that I should have. Maybe I should take a step back and use some of the strategies that Andy mentioned last night, right? Maybe I should use some different strategies. Maybe I didn't do the right things. Maybe I need to seek help this time. Maybe I need to ask for certain kinds of accommodations or assistance that I didn't have on the first exam. So these two are very different interpretations. One interpretation is about me and my capability, and the other is something that's in my control. Now, what I'm going to argue is that instructors have a really ripe opportunity to help people make these assessments about what that number means. And I'm going to argue that we can design certain interventions or certain messages that can provide this meaning for students and redirect people to interpret that in an adaptive way. So one way to do that, and what I'm going to focus on in this talk throughout the different research that I'm going to present today, is instructor mindset beliefs. So instructor mindset beliefs are the beliefs and actions that instructors give or show to their students about the meaning of ability, whether that ability that students have is something that is fixed and unchangeable or something that is malleable and can change over time. So this is based in mindset theory, Carol Dweck's mindset theory. This theory says that people hold different mindsets or beliefs about the nature of human traits, such as intelligence, ability, talent. People who endorse more of a fixed mindset believe that abilities are fixed and can't be changed. It's something that you're just born with. You are a math person. You are mathematically inclined. You're a science person. You're more of an artsy person. Okay, it's something indicative of you as a person, your personality and your ability. Okay? You either have what it takes to be successful in that field or you don't. The other side of that is a growth mindset. So a growth mindset are when people believe that abilities are malleable, that they can change over time with effort, with good, effective strategies, with seeking help when you exhausted all other options. A lot of the work in this area has been going on for many years, 20, 30 years, and I'm going to sum up that 30 years of research in this one slide. So decades of research has looked at this in various contexts with various people, all the things, and they've found, generally speaking, sort of on average speaking, that when students hold this fixed mindset belief that their abilities are something that can't be changed, it leads to decreased engagement, decreased persistence on challenging tasks, and sometimes, in some contexts, decreased performance. And this is particularly heightened when encountering a challenging situation, such as getting that poor exam grade. Once you get that grade, you've reached a challenge. You've reached sort of a decision-making point where should I put in more effort or should I disengage and put in less effort? Now, this work has been going on for a long time. So with that comes some misconceptions. So I'm going to clear up some of that on this slide. So a few things that a growth mindset is not. Okay. So first of all, it is not dichotomous. Now, I just showed you a slide that said it was dichotomous. It's not dichotomous. It's continuous. Okay. And what that means is that people can exist somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to talk most of the talk in the dichotomous way because it's easier to talk about it in that way. But people generally fall somewhere kind of in the middle. So you can think, well, maybe sometimes I have this growth mindset. Maybe sometimes I have a fixed mindset. Maybe I don't really know. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. We put in some effort, but we also have some basic abilities that apply. Okay, so these are people's lay beliefs about where ability comes from. The other misconception is that it is effort only. Okay, this is what Carol Dweck calls a false growth mindset. This is when instructors or teachers focus exclusively on the effort piece. So if you just put in more effort, then your ability will change over time. Okay. Now, that is true to some extent, but it's more than just effort. It's also using effective strategies. It's also seeking help because we know that students, right, if they continue to do the same ineffective strategy over time, they put a lot of effort into those ineffective strategies, change is not going to happen, or at least it's not going to happen very quickly. Okay. So it's not just effort alone, and in fact, that can actually have a backfiring effect. So when you have an instructor that says, well, you just need to try harder, and the student's thinking, I did try hard, I really did, I put in a lot of effort, that can actually be demotivating. Okay, so it's more than just effort. It's also more than just being positive. So it's not just having a great attitude. It's not just, you can do it, you can be great at this. It's not just that positive piece. It can be really challenging. It can be really hard whenever you are faced with a situation that you don't know how to navigate, that you're making mistakes, you're challenging yourself. That's an uncomfortable feeling. Okay, it's not always going to be a positive experience. Sometimes it can actually be very negative. So mistakes and challenges are welcome, but it's not always going to feel good. Now, most of the research on growth mindset up until probably the past 10 years or so has focused exclusively on students. So what do students believe, and how does that impact what they do and their motivation? Okay, now this work is a lot of important. I summed all of that up on that previous slide. But when you focus just exclusively on the student's belief system, you are ignoring the contextual factors that happen that those beliefs exist in. So as I told you, I'm a social psychologist, so I'm really interested in that interaction between the student and their belief and how that interacts with everybody else's beliefs and what they do and their behavior. It can also lead to blaming the student. So, well, you got that poor exam grade on that exam that I talked about in the previous slides because you just didn't have the right mindset. We just need to change your mindset and then everything's going to be smooth sailing for you. Okay. We know that that's not always the case. Okay. We know that there are structural factors. We know that you can have a growth mindset, but if your instructor is telling you that everything's fixed, that people are math people and some people are not, that's going to be a very different context to enact that growth mindset. So what we need to do is we need to consider all the other messages that are happening in that context and have a look at those messages in that environment. So what I'm going to do in this talk is sort of shift the focus away from the student's belief system and focus on the meaning creator or the meaning maker in that environment, which in the classroom is the instructor. The instructor sets the culture. The instructor sets sort of the tone for what the expectations are. So we're going to focus on instructors and their beliefs. So how do the mindset cues that instructors give to their students, how do those cues then influence students' behavior? Okay. And students are really perceptive, okay? When you believe something, that trickles down into the behaviors that you do, how you talk to students, and students pick up on that real fast. So today I'm going to talk about 3 studies that my lab has conducted over the years. The first one is a university-wide study of self-reported faculty mindset beliefs. So I'm going to use faculty, professors, instructors interchangeably. I know people think of those terms differently in different contexts, but what I'm referring to is just the person who's teaching the class, okay, whoever that might be in that context. The second study is a laboratory experiment where we're manipulating these cues that the instructors give to their students and seeing whether there's a causal effect there. And then the third study is a randomized field intervention that we did in an introductory biology class. All right, so let's jump right into the first study. The first study, what we did is we surveyed 150 STEM faculty at a university, and we surveyed them about their mindset beliefs. We asked them just a couple questions, because it's hard to get faculty to do things. They fill out surveys and things. So we kept it really short and said just 2 questions, just fill out these 2 questions. And we actually surprisingly got quite a bit of responses. So 150 of the faculty at this university filled it out. So we were able to sort of calculate what their mindset beliefs are. We also asked them about their demographics and their teaching experience. And here is the distribution of these beliefs. So we have on the left, those are the faculty who have more of this fixed mindset belief. On the right, we have the faculty who have this more growth mindset belief about students' abilities. And for the most part, it's normally distributed. So we see a lot of people sort of in the middle, but also in the extremes. I really like the spike on number 2 here. So it's like people are not willing to be like that person, right? The most fixed, but they're willing to be the one right next to it. So I like that little spike there. Now, this is where those faculty reside. So these are the STEM departments that they come from. At this particular university, there are 13 STEM departments, so we sampled them from all 13. We also we had the most responses in biology. It's a very large department on this campus. But we also have people from math, statistics, physics, computer science. The gender and race breakdown here mirrors faculty demographics in STEM at large in the United States. So these are numbers that are consistent with what we see in terms of instructors in STEM departments nationwide. Then what we did is after we surveyed the faculty, we obtained the course grades from every single student that these faculty members taught over a 2-year period. Okay. So we went back into the archives and we pulled all of the student records that are associated with students in these faculty members' classes. This came out to be over 600 STEM courses and just over 15,000 undergraduate students. And these demographics mirror the demographics at this particular university. The next slide is the math slide. So for those of you who are interested in the modeling, I'm just going to run through this real fast. We ran a multi-level model with partially crossed random effects. So multi-level means that students are nested within courses. Those courses are nested within faculty because it's a longitudinal study. We also added partially crossed random effects. So what that means is that students can take classes from more than one faculty member in the sample. So students generally take, between 3 to 5 classes every semester. So what that means is they're in the data set multiple times. Okay, so we have 15,000 students, but it's really like 50 or 60,000 observations when students are in there more than one time. So we have to model that in the data to make sure the standard errors are corrected. We also included a bunch of covariates that I'll just put up here, real fast. We did this because we know there's a lot of things that predict students' performance, how big your class is, what level it is, their prior performance on these standardized tests, other faculty demographics like tenure status, years teaching. All of those things tend to predict student performance, so we added those in to account for that. Then we looked at whether or not these beliefs that faculty hold predict students' grades. So the first thing we found was a main effect of faculty mindset beliefs. So what we find here, and again, I'm talking about it in the binary, but it is a continuous variable. So what this means is we took the faculty who were 1 standard deviation above the mean. So these are the more growthy faculty, okay, on the right there. And then the more fixed faculty on the left. And what we see is that students are earning higher grades when their instructor endorses more of a growth mindset. They're endorsing, or they're getting better grades in those courses. What's really interesting here, though, is that it differs, or this effect differs based on students' race ethnicity. So we found that underrepresented minoritized students performed more poorly in STEM courses when their instructor endorsed more of a fixed mindset belief about ability. Okay. So let's break this down. The blue bars here are represent the majority group. On this campus, that is white and Asian students. That categorization might be different depending on what campus you're at or what your environment is. On this particular campus, white and Asian students are overrepresented according to census data. The red bars here represent minoritized students. So these are, in this context, Black, Hispanic, and Native American students. And what you can see here is the racial performance gap, the racial opportunity gap, whatever name you're placing on that. What this means is that minoritized students are performing more poorly in these classes overall compared to majority group students. Okay, that gap is there. But what's interesting here, though, and what the interaction shows, is that the size of this gap is predicted by the belief system of the faculty member. Okay, so when the faculty member has this more growth or has this more fixed mindset about ability, the achievement gap is twice as large. It doubles in size. And then it shrinks down to half its size when the faculty member has more of a growth mindset. Now, this was really powerful stuff because we're thinking, well, these gaps have been around for a long time. And when you think about students and what they have to do to get a degree in STEM or go into med school, they're taking, 10, 20, sometimes 30 science classes to get there. So even though this is a fairly small effect in terms of the actual numbers of grade point averages here, those are going to add up significantly over time when they encounter faculty like this over and over in their STEM degree. So I skipped over a couple things. We also looked at course evaluations, and essentially the punchline there is that faculty with a growth mindset get better course evaluation. Okay. So to summarize this study, these beliefs predict students' experiences in these STEM courses. Okay, we see that in their evaluations, but we see it most pronounced in their grades in these courses. And what that implies, or what that suggests, is that faculty mindset beliefs may contribute to these racial achievement gaps that we're seeing in STEM fields. Now, this work is correlational. Okay, so this work is just looking at these things coexisting together, relating to one another in some kind of meaningful way. But what it suggests is that it might be an opportunity to intervene. It might be an opportunity to change some of those social psychological factors that are existing in the classroom. So before we move on to an intervention, we want to make sure that this is a real effect, that there's this causal relationship between these cues or these beliefs and students' performance. Okay, so we can think of all kinds of reasons why we found what we found in the first study. We can think of all reasons why it might be the case other than faculty mindset beliefs. So we wanted to make sure that this was a causal relationship. So what we did in this study, we did a laboratory experiment. So here we had undergraduate students come into our laboratory. We told them this was a study about perceptions of a Calculus 2 course at the university. So we said, we're thinking about adding this to the curriculum. We were going to test out some of the materials. We just want to hear your thoughts about it. So we brought them in, told them about this potential class that they were going to add. And we chose to base this study on perceptions of a calculus class in particular, because what we wanted to do here, we weren't able to look at race ethnicity because it's a fairly white campus that we're doing this experiment on. So we wanted to look at a similar process for women in a context in which they are negatively stereotyped, So the stereotype is that women have less math ability than men. So we're in this context of women with negative stereotypes about their identity. Then what we did is we randomly assigned these students to read a syllabus that we created. And they read one of two syllabi. So one of them was infused with growth mindset language about the class, what to expect in this class, how to be successful, what the instructor believes about ability and doing well. And then the other half read a syllabus that was infused with fixed mindset language. Okay, I'll show you some examples of what we did there. Then what happened is they read the syllabus and we said, we're thinking about implementing a placement test for this class to be able to get into the class. And so we had them do 30 GRE math problems for this ostensible placement test. Now, before I show you some of the manipulations, I want to mention that we base these manipulations on student feedback. Okay, so we use two different sources to source some of the language that I'm going to show you. One was student feedback. So we asked students, here's what a growth mindset is, here's what a fixed mindset is. Can you think of examples of what faculty have said to you or have written on their syllabi that would be indicative of this sort of belief? Okay, so we source students' opinions. We also source some of the language from actual real syllabi. So we have a data set of a bunch of faculty members' syllabi. Many institutions post them publicly. So we combed a bunch of these syllabi for exact language that faculty have used in their classes. So keep that in mind when you're reading some of this. So what did we do? What we did, both syllabi had the same policies. So we're not implementing any differences in policies, but the meaning behind that policy or the reason why or the explanation differed depending on which syllabus they were reading. So let's look at the fixed syllabus here. In the fixed syllabus, they don't take attendance. That's the policy. They say, I recommend that weaker students attend lecture and discussion sections because I believe students can do well in the course without attending class. Okay? And I don't want to penalize those students. If you're here and it's repetitive, you don't need to show up. That's why I have this policy. In the growth mindset syllabus, they say, I don't take attendance. That's still the same policy, but I still recommend you come. I recommend that everybody comes to every lecture and discussion section, regardless of your previous performance, because everybody can learn something new. Everybody can challenge themselves. Attending class is one way to improve your math skills. So here the message is about communicating some students are going to do well, some students won't, and categorizing them based off of innate ability. We also manipulated things throughout the syllabus. Another area we manipulated was around quizzes. So here the policy is the same again. Policies, there's a quiz every Monday covering the previous week's material. In the fixed mindset syllabus, it says, the quizzes are going to give you a better idea about your abilities, okay? And it's going to foreshadow your performance on the exams. This is a good indicator of how you're going to do on the exam based on my previous experience teaching this class. Weaker students who don't perform well on these quizzes are going to struggle a lot on the exams. In the growth mindset syllabus, there's still a quiz every Monday. The quizzes are going to show me how well students are understanding the material, whether or not some students are not there yet. Okay, so there's some room for improvement. Whether we need to review certain things. If you find yourself failing the quizzes, you need to do something different. Okay, let's seek additional help so we can grow your understanding before the exam. Another area was on help resources. Getting some help. So both courses let them know about these help sessions offered by the department. The fixed syllabus says, the smart students who are gifted in math are probably not going to need these resources. In the growth mindset syllabus, everybody should make use of them. Every student can improve and challenge themselves by attending these help sessions. Now, again, you might be thinking, well, these are super unrealistic. Nobody would ever say that in their classes. Nobody would ever put that on their syllabus. You would be wrong. These people say lots of stuff. You all are here because you care about education, right? You are a different group of people than the people in these data sets. Now, we're interested in the student experience, how they respond to these things. So we're asking students some survey questions. We ask them about their the perceived gender stereotyping. So I think the professor in this class is going to endorse gender stereotypes. We also asked about their anticipated belonging. If you were to take this hypothetical class that we may or may not implement at the university, would you feel like you belong? And then, of course, we're looking at the performance on this math test. All right, so what do they think about the stereotyping? What we have here is we have the fixed mindset professor on the left, the growth mindset professor on the right, and we have their perceptions of how much that professor endorses gender stereotyping. We first found a main effect of condition. So this means that on average, students thought that the fixed mindset professor would endorse more gender stereotypes compared to the growth mindset professor. So this was true for men. This is what I'm showing you first. Men thought this was going to be true as well. Of course, women picked up on this right away. We also found a significant interaction with student gender. So what this means is that when the professor signaled a fixed mindset, women thought the professor would endorse even more gender stereotypes compared to men. There were no gender differences in perceptions of stereotyping in the growth mindset condition. Okay. So what this suggests is that both men and women are picking up on this. Okay. So they're both perceiving that the fixed mindset professor is going to stereotype women. The difference is that that stereotype is going to be detrimental for women, but not men. They're not on the negative end of that stereotype. Let's look at belonging. So I'm flipping the scale on you. I know it's super annoying. What this means is that higher scores are good. Okay, higher scores on the last one were bad. Now they're good. Okay, we want these things to be high. What we find again is a main effective condition. So all students on average feel like they're not going to fit in as well in the fixed mindset professor's class. This was true for men, what I'm showing you first, also for women. And then, not surprising, we find the interaction as well. So what this means is that when the professor signaled a fixed mindset, women felt less belonging compared to men. And there's no significant differences, although it does flip a little bit in the growth mindset condition. Now let's look at performance, what a lot of people care about. Here, we're looking at performance on the math test. Okay, so we have how many questions they got right out of 30. You'll notice the scale doesn't go to 30. They didn't do great. Okay, they didn't do so well. What we find is that first I'm going to show you the men's performance. So men performed equally well, depending on which course it was. Okay, whether the professor had a fixed mindset, growth mindset, didn't matter. They're performing about the same level. However, this was not the case for women. So when the professor signaled a fixed mindset, men significantly outperformed women on this math test. What this boils down to is about 4 questions on average correct compared to women. This is a huge effect size, okay? They're not doing so well to begin with out of 30, right? So 4 out of an average of around, 9 is a lot. However, when the professor signaled a growth mindset, this gender gap was reduced significantly by about 60%. Okay, so it doesn't go away completely. We're not solving huge problems here, okay? But we're narrowing things. We're narrowing those gaps that exist based on faculty language. And what this suggests is that these mindset beliefs are affecting women's performance, but not men's performance. So what does this look like in terms of mechanism, putting it all together? What we found and what we hypothesize is that the professor mindset beliefs would lead to greater perceptions of gender stereotyping, which would lead to feeling like you're not going to fit in that class as much, and then that would then undermine women's but not men's performance on the math test. Okay? So we found that this indirect effect was significant for women but not significant for men. Now, this is really interesting, this psychology that's happening between these two groups. So the professor with the fixed mindset was threatening for women. Okay? It made them think that they're going to be stereotyped by their professor. It led to lower belonging. And when you don't feel like you're going to fit in or belong, that can also lead to lower performance. Now, men also found the fixed mindset professor threatening. Okay? They also felt like they weren't going to fit in. They also felt that this person endorses some things that maybe I don't agree with. But the key here is that it did not affect the way that they performed on that exam. Those concerns didn't translate into a difference in performance And the reason for that, or the reason that we hypothesize, is that because they are not going to be negatively affected by that negative stereotype. Whether or not they're going to stereotype women doesn't affect me because that is not impinging my ability. So the purpose of this study was to establish this causal link. Can we show that behaviors or messages from instructors actually cause people to perform differently? Is there a causal link between this process? So what we found is that communicating a fixed mindset is threatening for everybody. Nobody likes these professors. They tend to use these stereotypes. Nobody feels like they belong. However, only when you're part of the group that's negatively stereotyped does this affect your performance. Okay, in this study, we're looking at women compared to men. All right, so we've shown that this exists in the wild with this first study. Okay, we found this correlation between these beliefs and how students perform in their classes. Then we show that there's this causal link between these things that is actually causing them to underperform. So now we're thinking, well, now we can change things. We can go in and we can tell people to say things differently, and then that will then change people's performance. So we wanted to see if we could intervene and focus these mindset messages at very critical times in the semester that may or may not then lead students to engage with the course differently and then ultimately affect their performance. So what we did here is we went into a very large introductory biology course. This course has over 400 students enrolled in it. It's one of the largest courses on this particular campus. We looked at the performance gaps between groups in this class. So there is a modest racial performance gap between Black, Hispanic, Native students compared to white and Asian students. But the largest gap here is with first-generation college students. Women are doing fine in biology. They tend to outperform men in biology. So here, the largest gap between students is between first-generation college students and continuing generation college students. So that's the group that we're most interested in changing in this particular course. So here's a little graph of kind of what we did. So we picked critical times in the semester that we thought these mindset messages would have the greatest impact. Okay. When students get their grades back, when they're thinking about what that meaning is, how should I interpret my ability compared to what this number is that I'm seeing? It's this key time of uncertainty. What does this mean? This is a ripe opportunity to provide that meaning for students. So what does this grade mean about my ability? So at the beginning of the semester, what we did is we randomly assigned everybody in the class to either a control condition or a growth mindset condition. And then after each exam, all students received an email from their instructor. Half of them received the control email, which I'll show you in a minute. And then the other half received the growth mindset email after the exams. We then collected their grades throughout the semester, their final course grade at the end of the class. And then we also pulled all the data from the LMS, so the course website. So we're looking at how often students are engaging with the materials that are posted online in this class. Here is the control email. So it says, dear student, we've posted the grades. Here's how they're calculated. Happy to meet with you in office hours. Pretty standard sort of procedural message that you might send to your students. In the growth mindset condition, we included all of this information, but then we added a big fat paragraph about the instructor's views about learning, about what exam performance means, and how to do well in this class. We tried to condense it, but we're a little wordy, so it was kind of, it was a big chunk of a paragraph. So what it reads is, I believe that every student, regardless of how well you did on this particular exam, they can improve their skills, learn from your mistakes, and be successful in this class. Remember, learning's a process. It occurs over time. Let me give you a secret. You don't need to be quote unquote smart to perform at a high level in this class. You can work hard, work effectively to master the material. Here's how I know this. I've worked with lots of students who may have performed poorly on the first exam, but they turned things around and made improvements on their remaining exams. How did they do it? It wasn't by suddenly getting smarter, getting a higher IQ. Here's what they told me about how they made those improvements, and then we gave them some strategies. Okay. These are pretty basic strategies. They're like, if you're rereading stuff, stop doing that. Maybe try something different. If you're not studying in group, maybe you should try that. Okay. Some pretty basic level strategies. Now, these strategies are not new. They have already heard this. Everybody in the class has heard that these strategies are things that they should have done. Okay, the instructor is not withholding this information from the control group, but it's putting it within context of this message of growth, okay, in these emails. So let's look at their grades in the course. Let's just go straight to the punchline. So in the control condition, which I'm showing you up here, what we see is that continuing generation students, those are in blue, are significantly outperforming the first generation college students. Those are in the green. Okay. So they're earning about a third of a letter grade higher. So this is the biggest gap in the class. They're earning about a third of a letter grade higher in the control condition. In the growth mindset condition, we see this gap completely go away. So we're increasing first generation students' grades by about a third of a letter grade. We were super excited about this. We were like, these emails are just amazing, right? What we're hypothesizing is that the timing of these emails were really important. So if we had sent these emails 2 weeks prior to the exam, one, nobody would read them. Nobody cares. They haven't even started studying yet, right? But when you send it right when those grades are posted, now they care. Now they have reached this uncertainty period. What does this mean? Does this mean I'm good at it, not good at it? What does it mean? How am I, they're comparing it to their peers. Okay, so the timing of it really matters. We also wanted to look at some behavioral mechanisms. So again, we pulled all of the LMS data. What this means is this is a web page hit. So this is the number of times they're clicking on the web page that contains the course materials. Okay, so this is lecture notes, lecture slides. This is course recording, lecture recordings. This is study guide. This is quizzes. Okay. What we see is a main effect of the intervention. So everybody on average in the growth mindset condition had higher website activity than those in the control. Okay. It was about 40 instances more on average. So they're clicking about 40 times on average more in the growth mindset condition. This is a 12% increase in web page engagement. Okay. So they're engaging differently, or at least more often, depending on how you look at it. They're engaging more often with the course material when they have this message of growth. And not surprisingly, when people are engaging more with the in-course material, that then leads to higher performance. Okay, so we see a mediation effect here where we see that these growth mindset cues lead to accessing the course materials on the LMS, and then that activity on the LMS then predicts their course grade. So let's summarize some studies. What we found across a few studies and ones that I haven't showed you are that instructors that communicate these growth mindset messages, they tend to have smaller racial performance gaps in STEM. They tend to have a causal impact on reducing gender performance gaps, at least in math. And then they tend also, in the field experiment, to reduce performance gaps for first-generation college students. So I've showed you a couple ways to communicate a growth mindset in a classroom, but there are a number of ways that you can do it. So how can you apply the same type of thing to a class that might look different? Maybe you don't have 400 students in your class. And there are things that we know now about how best to communicate it. So the first thing you should do is just be super explicit. You should say to your students explicitly, here's what I believe about ability. I believe that it's this. Be really explicit about your endorsement of what a growth mindset means. Make sure to include the full definition, so not just effort. It's about strategies, help seeking. There are pathways to make those improvements. There's a lot of ways you can do this in your syllabus planning or course planning, course design. Creating opportunities so that students can show that growth to you in their assessment. So revision opportunities, rewarding improvement. So the way that you assess students, rewarding improvement, rewarding challenge seeking can also be one way to promote growth. Explaining the purpose behind a lot of the things that you do. So I planned it this way because I think that you can improve. I planned it this way because this is what it means. I think you should seek help, not because it's something that you should be afraid of or it means that you're not doing well. It means that you want to learn more. It means that you are seeking out challenges. Providing that reason, destigmatizing help seeking, is part of communicating this growth mindset. Performance feedback, so the way that you respond to mistakes and struggle, is this something to avoid or is this something to dive in head first because it's a learning opportunity? Offer feedback with strategies for improvement. Okay, so not offering feedback to students throughout the semester, they're sort of left swimming without any kind of guidance. So the general conclusion here is that instructors have a really good opportunity. Okay, we've got a whole bunch of structural issues that we should still be working on. There are things that we're trying to tackle. But in your environment that you have control over, you have an opportunity to create meaning for students. And it requires being intentional about what you say, how you say it, and if you do it in a way that's meaningful for students in a time of uncertainty, what we've shown is that it can potentially narrow performance gaps in science courses. So I'd like to thank some of the collaborators on this work, Dr. Katie Minks, Doreen Green, Mary Murphy, my graduate student, Makita White, and my collaborator at WSU, Bill Davis. We also received some funding from the National Science Foundation for some of this work. And then here's my contact for questions, but I'd also like to open it up for Q&A. Thank you.
One of the things I was wondering about was the professors in the study, were they all male? And the reason I asked this is because I had a unique experience. It registered in Introduction to Feminism, where I was the only man in the class, and no, I wasn't looking for a date. But the thing is that I wondered whether there was a fixed mindset on the part of the female instructor. And it was interesting that during a coffee break, that one of the students came up to me and she said, we had a guy in the class last week, but he left. And then when I looked at my grades in that, there was quite a difference between my grade and the average grade within the class. And yet, I thought that I was doing a fairly good job. So I'm just curious, does this fixed mindset also apply to female instructors as well as male instructors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the first study, we had enough faculty members to look at demographics. So we looked at gender, we looked at race as well, although we were super underpowered to look at it. What we found is that there are no differences in who holds a fixed mindset or a growth mindset based on faculty gender. So men and women are equally likely to have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. We also looked at interactions with student performance. So maybe a fixed mindset from a male faculty means something different than a fixed mindset from a female faculty. We found no significant interactions with gender and beliefs. So it's not the case that gender matters in terms of faculty mindset. We also, let's see, your other question. Oh, for faculty race as well. We didn't find any differences in race by faculty, but also interactions with faculty. Again, we were super underpowered. So at least in our data, we don't find any gender effects.
Okay, you said wording matters, and I wanted to congratulate you for some wonderful wording that you chose. You said one of the strategies is for students to seek help when they have exhausted all other options. I'm a high school teacher, math and science, and we deal a lot with trying to teach the students, yes, we're here to help, but we shouldn't be your first spoon-fed go-to. So I really appreciated the wording there. I also think the email after the test links really well. Anyone who was here last year, there was a speaker about emailing before the tests and just saying that a bit of nerves is normal and that study. So I really like coming year after year and seeing how things link together and build. My question is, I've dabbled the last few years in going gradeless. Obviously, there has to be an end of term grade, but in the first 2 months, not giving grades, again, this is high school students, but, and just feedback. What are you doing well? What needs to be improved? Conferencing with the students. And unfortunately, I don't have the resources to collect real data, but anecdotally, it's really, really cool. So I was just wondering to you and to everyone in the room if anyone's looked into that idea. So I guess to you, have you heard anything about going gradeless?
Yes. So we haven't looked at that empirically. But what I think going gradeless kind of forces the instructor to do is to explain the why. So why am I doing this? This is something that maybe your other classes are not doing. It forces you to explain, well, here's what I think. I'm really focused on the learning process. I'm really focused on this thing. So I want to focus on that instead of these, other types of metrics. Okay? It forces you to kind of explain that to students, which is this ripe opportunity for, communicating that growth mindset. You can still do that when you have, grades in your class. But I think sometimes we forget to do that because it's just so normalized to assess students in that way. But I think it would be a really great experiment to run to look at that empirically. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Thanks for a really great talk, and I really appreciate your perspective on what it is that we as instructors can be doing to improve learning outcomes in the classroom. The one thing that your data really made me think of was what's driving these growth mindset effects. And I just wondered if this might be something that you've looked at or thought about. When I read through those examples, I felt like when I'm reading the growth mindset version, that I almost feel like more positive affect about maybe the course or about the instructor. And I sort of wonder if you were to ask questions like, do you think this instructor is nice to children or animals?
Yeah.
After reading those different versions of
Oh, yeah.
the syllabus, would you find similarly positive effects for
Oh,
those types of
undoubtedly, I'm
things?
sure. But I think your question gets to a confound in the research. So we've looked at this. So the idea is that having a growth mindset is communicating this approachability. Okay, they're more approachable, they're nicer, they're friendlier than the fixed mindset professors. I think the examples I showed you definitely showcase that. What we've done is we've done an experiment where we have manipulated what the message is, whether it's growth or fixed, and then we've also crossed that with manipulations of how that message is communicated. Whether it's communicated in a really cold, unapproachable, unfriendly way, which you can still do with a growth mindset, or whether it's communicated in a really warm and friendly and approachable way, which is also true of a fixed mindset. And it's actually more common to be super warm and comforting with a fixed mindset. So examples are comforting students. So saying, it's okay if you're not a math person. Let's find something that's a good fit for you. We want your GPA to be a certain way. We want you to be happy. We want you to be successful. So let's find what you're good at. That's a fixed mindset statement, but that's saying, I care about you. Let's talk about it. Come to my office hours. It's friendly. It's saying that they're caring for you. So we've manipulated that, and what we found essentially is that being warm is good. Like, still be friendly. That's a good thing. You should be approachable. Having a growth mindset is good. So both of those things are good. They do interact. So having a growth mindset and being warm is the best. You should be both of those things. But what's interesting is that being warm and friendly cannot make up for having a fixed mindset. But the opposite is true for the other way you look at the interaction. So having a growth mindset can make up for being unapproachable. So what that suggests to us is that the message is really, really important. Communicating it in a friendly way is also important. But if you had to choose, the message itself is what is driving the effects.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks. That was a great talk. I did have one question related to your last study. I found that really interesting that you saw a real difference in the level of engagement with students in the LMS. And so I was curious if you were going to kind of go a little bit further with that and maybe look at a fully online course and how it's presented and if you see some of those differences today.
Yes. So we have done that. The pandemic made that very easy to do. Let me think back to which semester this study was in. I can't remember off the top of my head. So we've done this 3 different times in the same class. Well, I guess 4 different times, but we haven't analyzed the 4th time. So for all 3, we find similar effects for first-generation students. The difference from the pandemic semesters is that we don't see as big of a performance effect. So we see it a lot on the psychological measures. So we reduce imposter feelings for first-gen students. We increase belonging for first-gen students. But the performance effects really vary. And we're not sure if that means that it's not as consistent as we thought, or if the pandemic semesters were just super different and doing biology online when you don't have a lab is just a really different experience than doing it in person. So that, unfortunately, we can't do an experiment with the pandemic kind of stuff. So it's an open question. It could be that these emails mean something different in a context where you're only emailing a professor, you don't never see them in person. The opposite could be true as well, that it's actually more powerful because that's how you communicate with them. So it's an open question, but we do see similar findings across the different contexts.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your presentation. Well, I'll come in two folds, and I think Joe will be in a better position to respond to I don't know, I'll present it. You talked about the system, the economy, how it affects the instructor to do his work properly. Then I'm worried about how do we intervene? I think there is this basic assumption that the whole place is on the same level. Well, I'm from Africa, and I can say that the level with which government takes education is not the same as what we have around there. So I'm being curious, and that's where I'm coming to Joe. Is there any kind of collaboration or partnership to look at what this is all about and where UNICEF can come in and probably UNESCO? Because it's not just what happens when the instructor itself or herself needs help.
Yeah.
For instance, just last year, tertiary institutions in my country were on industrial action for like 8 months. The universities were shut for 8 months. So I don't know the state of mind that the instructor will then, do you understand, come to class with to impact knowledge when the instructor himself or herself needs help.
Yeah.
So I want us to look at I want you to respond to how we can intervene in ensuring that the instructor, despite the socio-economic and other challenges, can still come to the faculty and do the job. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So instructors have all kinds of things that they have to deal with, in addition to being a teacher in the classroom, right? All of that then impacts the way that they communicate with students, how they can relate to students. The country level politics, the worldwide politics, absolutely come into the classroom. I think it would be extremely naive to say that our little bubble is just sort of different than what's going on in the world. It definitely comes in. It definitely interacts. I think we're not in a place empirically in our research to where we can look at that in a very systematic way. But we do have some efforts looking at it in different countries, looking at institutionalized factors that influence it. I think a more general question is the types of supports that faculty receive varied a lot depending on what type of institution you're at. So your ability to be able to do certain things in your classroom are opportunities for some people, but not opportunities for others. Okay, so just the way that your class is structured. So I'm thinking of yoked classrooms where you teach a section, somebody else teaches a section, and they have to be parallel, right? And one instructor has to do it a certain way, and you're sort of in a place where you don't have choices. I do think that there are still ways that you can communicate these ideas, even when you can't redesign your course, even when you don't have a lot of resources to do certain things. I think I've shown you ways that you can do it in a very specific context. But I think you can take the principles and still use them in other contexts that might be different than this one. But I think your larger question around, the socioeconomic positions that faculty are in vary widely. And it would be really, really interesting to look at that as an interaction in the future. Yeah.
Thanks. I think I'm next. Thank you so much. I found your talk really fascinating.
Thank you.
And I spent a lot of years working one-on-one with students in a learning center. So what you said about their reactions to their marks really hit home for me. And I now work with faculty education developer. And so I was thinking about how we could operationalize some of your intervention. And it would be really easy in some ways, like very easy to sort of say, here's some text for emails that you might send.
Yeah.
But it started to make me think about a couple questions, and it's not part of the studies you've done, but I wondered about your thoughts on is there a problem of authenticity if we talk to faculty who really have a fixed mindset and we say, you should send these emails and
Yeah.
show a growth mindset, and they're sending them and they don't really
Yeah.
think it? Like, might that have effect? And also, if everybody is sending those emails. So
Yeah.
if a student is getting 5 emails right after midterms
Oh, yeah.
from different professors saying this, I wonder if they'll mean as much
Yes.
as when they're getting it from a single professor. So those are just some thoughts, but again, your research is just fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's a valid concern. So almost inevitably, I always get someone that says, send me the materials, send me the emails. And I have been responding to that in a way of, I'm not going to send you the emails. And the reason for that is because I want you to go through the process of thinking about it. The process of writing it is just as good for you as an instructor as it is for the student who's receiving that email. So you going through the process of, what do I want to say? How does it fit with my class? How am I tailoring it to my students? That process then changes the way you think about it, and then that's going to penetrate other ways that you communicate with students. So there's a great worksheet that Mary Murphy and Christine Logo have developed where it gives you some guiding principles about what you should think about when sending these messages to students. And it doesn't give you exact examples of like click, paste, copy, paste kind of thing. But it says, have you included this in your message? Have you talked about this in your message? It's sort of like a checklist. And I think that is the best way to think about sending these things, because then it's a process that you've undergone yourself. It's tailored to your students, and it's not going to be the exact same thing across faculty members at the same institution.
There's also ChatGPT.
And ChatGPT. I haven't even done that yet.
I have a question about language, and I love the fact that you're using language as a major role in that, because it is our view into how we run our brains.
Yeah.
The mindset language, what's the research that has gone behind that? I'm really curious to sort of look at the whole linguistic piece.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's any specific linguistics about growth mindset language. So there are a few studies that myself and others have done where we look at materials and we've created sort of dictionaries to comb through websites and materials online to pick out, growth mindset language and quantify it. So we've done that piece of it, but I think your question speaks a little bit more to like the types of words that we use, the lexicon that we're using to communicate these things. I think we've kind of been guided by Carol Dweck's research in looking at sort of the components of what a growth mindset is. So things like communicating that ability can change, that's sort of a primary one. Communicating that challenge is necessary and normalized. Communicating that there are different pathways to make that improvements through a variety of reasons, like help seeking, different strategies and things. So I think we use those guiding principles to come up with the language. But in terms of like particular wording choices, we haven't really gotten that deep yet.
Hi. One aspect of your presentation, you mentioned that an important aspect of a growth mindset is having a growth mindset, particularly with regard to mistakes.
Yeah.
I teach elementary school, mostly grade 8s, and I find it's very sad when you see a student who might lack a little confidence or not have that growth mindset begin to come out of their shell when they begin to feel like they're understanding something, and then they raise their hand to answer a question and they get it wrong, and it's very devastating for them, and then they kind of tighten up for the rest of the class. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for how to develop a growth mindset, particularly with regards to mistakes, especially at the elementary level.
Yeah, I think your response to that is so important. Because when that mistake, it's public, right? Everybody else in the class knows that you made a mistake, right? It's not a good feeling. The way that you respond to that and say, I'm so glad you said that answer, because now I can explain how we get from here to here. Now I can explain that people do this all the time. that a lot of you are probably going to make this mistake. And what that means is that we need to redirect or we need to learn something different. It provided me as the teacher the opportunity to grow your ability. That reframing, then they're like, oh, now I did a service to the class, right? Now I'm like part of this and we're in it together. And that is a very different experience than, no, you're wrong. That's okay, but you're wrong. Here's the correct answer. It's still nice, it's still fine, but it doesn't give that message that it's a learning opportunity and we're all going to learn something from this.
Awesome talk. I really liked the first study showing instructors who have a growth mindset have students who earn higher grades. And of course, I'm like, well, why is that happening? And I think you kind of get at that in study 2, that student behavior seems to be part of it. But grades are much more subjective than like GRE math. So I'm wondering how much of it is also the role of the instructor in how they view their students and assign those grades, if you've thought about that or looked at that.
Yeah, so we have looked at the types of course structures that faculty have who tend to have more of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and they do structure their courses differently. So they do provide more homework. They provide opportunities for revision. They're less likely to have a midterm and a final, which is 2 opportunities to show grades. Now, as instructors, we kind of think that having more opportunities is easier than having the midterm and exam. So one of the criticisms is, well, the growth mindset faculty just have easier classes. And that's why the students are getting better grades. What we found through extensive research with students and faculty is that perceptions of difficulty differ widely between faculty and students. So what faculty think is difficult, students do not think is difficult, and vice versa. Students who have lots of homework find that really challenging. They have to do stuff every week, and that's hard. And people don't like that necessarily all the time. So sometimes their perceptions of difficulty differ from faculty. But we do find that the structures of the class are different. That they're doing different things. If they care about improving students' learning, it shows in the way that they have designed their class.
All right, thank you so much for all your amazing questions. Elizabeth will be here all throughout the day. And I think one of the fun things about coming to a conference, I think, is kind of the side conversations that pop up. So if you have a question you want to ask Elizabeth, please feel free to do so later today. I just want to take one question. So we've already had some really interesting conversations just driving in the car back and forth. And one of our conversations, we talked about how growth and fixed mindset, is it changing across the last decade?
Yeah.
And kind of, I was wondering, how does that impact how people might interview? Like interview candidates, if you have a fixed or growth mindset.
Yeah. So I think with the popularity of growth mindset, people kind of know the right answer around, filling out questionnaires about their mindset. They know sort of like growth mindset is good. We should say that we have one. But that might not be the way that they teach or the messages that they're giving students. So we're coming up with different ways of measuring it. That's sort of a separate issue. But your question around interviewing, I think what you would want to get to is, describe a class for me. How would you design this class? If you could teach whatever class you wanted and do whatever assignments you want, how would you structure it? What types of activities and assignments do you have? You can gain through that sort of those underlying beliefs around student learning, what they're capable of, especially with if you're hiring for a gateway class, the weed out classes, right? What is the purpose of this? How are you, helping students and making career decisions can be another one as well. So are you trying to find a fit for their ability? Are you trying to find a fit for their interests? What would you do if a student continually failed in your class and came to you and said, I've tried all the strategies. What can I do? What can I do? Their response to that is really telling.
Thank you so much.